Now, Don Barnett, you've seen his bio, pretty handsome looking guy, pretty smart guy. Don is going to come up tonight and really give you facts, not opinions, but facts about the refugee resettlement program. It's here. It is with us today. I have someone who is remained anonymous, but they were telling me that they have a friend who's a contractor here in town. And that contractor, part of his contract is to go out and refurbish homes that have been foreclosed upon. And who's buying those homes? The federal government. The federal government is then paying him and others to provide complete refurbishing of those homes, furnishings in the homes, and then who's moving in? The people who are flying in here to Kelly Air Force Base, and again from eyewitnesses who have seen the refugees coming off the airplanes at Kelly Air Force Base and then being taken over to Lackland Air Force Base and housed there for the night by our government, and then the Catholic Charities, which is the charity that here in San Antonio that has ties, that goes back to the 40s and 50s with Saul Alinsky, with other communist groups, and I won't go into those details tonight, but that's the Catholic Charity. They've received $2.2 billion since 2008 to 2013. The reality is they're making money off of these refugees. And these aren't refugees like the Vietnamese or like the Europeans who were escaping an ideology. They were escaping communism. They were trying to run for their life. They're not leaving any ideology behind. They're bringing their ideology with them. And in this brochure, let me just read for you. This is what the vetting process is for the United Nations High Council for Refugees. This is from their regulation. It says, often an applicant may not be able to support his statements for documentary or other proof, and in cases in which an applicant can provide evidence that all of his statements will be the exception rather than the rule, unquote. Therefore, the requirement of evidence should not be too strictly applied, unquote. Furthermore, untrue statements by themselves are not a reason for a refusal of refugee status. This is their regulation. Examiner's responsibility to evaluate such statements in the light of all the circumstances of the case. This is in this brochure. I don't have to ask Don if he's ever read that before. He's heard that before. He may even have taken some of his fire. But I'm telling you, here in San Antonio, those refugees are showing up in people's homes or in neighborhoods, and no one is being told about it. And the Catholic Charities are making a killing. The sad thing is, there may be a killing in our neighborhoods, and we won't know anything about it until it's too late, until the dots have been connected by some reporter. So Don, I want to welcome everyone, give him a big San Antonio Alamo welcome. Don, thanks for coming out. God bless you. Let's see. That. There we go. Turn off that. You want it up there? Yes. There you go. Sorry, I tend to be a bit of a reader, so I can't always talk contemporaneously. Can you hear me okay? Is that right? Okay, good. Let's see. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm still trying to get this out of the way. Is that still okay? Sound okay?
Might need it a little closer to you.
Okay. How's that? Is that okay? Okay.
I think
All
so.
right, great.
I think so.
Great. I hope to address 5 myths today and 1 half myth. At least it's something we hope to show as a half myth. And one of your representatives is working to help us and the whole country on that. First myth, refugee resettlement is a public-private venture with its implication that support from private sources plays an important role.
Second, that the program is covered by federal dollars only and places no burden on states and localities. Third, that the program pays for itself as refugees quickly become economically self-sufficient taxpayers. Four, that refugees are thoroughly vetted before they arrive, and that federal money, five, in the program acts as a fiscal stimulus. The half myth is that you have no choice in the matter because this is a federal mandate. We're hoping that that's not really a myth, but that's what we are in the process of addressing right now. I've been following refugee resettlement for about 25 years. I had a sort of a low-level job with the U.S. State Department that had me over in Russia for a period of 2 years. Actually, 1 year with the U.S. State Department and 1 year in another capacity. But unusually, many of the people at the embassy did not speak Russian, and many of them were under a non-fraternization policy protocol. I, on the other hand, was encouraged to fraternize with locals and also a Russian speaker. Everywhere, or quite often, I would get the question, is it true if I go to the United States, I can retire on government benefits? And I had to scratch my head and said, yeah, well, technically, if you go to the United States as a refugee, you could retire on government benefits, or something that would seem to be a retirement. However, I don't think it's quite right for you. But anyway, at that point, I realized people in Siberia and in Central Asia knew more about the refugee program than the average American. The program we have today began with the 1980 Refugee Act, the work of Ted Kennedy and Joe Biden. Joe Biden, the state of Delaware, by the way, takes almost no refugees. You do know that Texas is the leading refugee state, right? It takes more refugees than any other state. It is based on, 1980 Refugee Act is based on UN treaties and agreements which most industrialized countries have signed on to, and most do take refugees in varying numbers. A refugee, by legal definition, must be outside of his or her country and have a well-founded fear of return because of persecution based on membership in a race, religion, nationality, social group, or political group. And it's very important to meet one of those categories. You just don't get over here just by saying, I'm persecuted. You have to prove that you're a member of one of those groups. Congress, the administration, and the judiciary have stretched these definitions beyond recognition. Did you know that individuals claiming to fear China's one-child policy are members of a political group? That's Congress's opinion. They passed a law saying, putting them automatically in a political group so that they could ask for asylum and meet the requirement. Did you know that schizophrenic Tanzanians are a social group for purposes of qualifying as a refugee, as are single mothers from Guatemala? The U.S. has long been the leader in resettlement and typically takes more than twice as many refugees as the rest of the industrialized world combined. And here I'm talking about a formal refugee program. I am not talking about or comparing our program with the unexpected and unplanned influx of immigrants into Europe. Europe, of course, is even more dramatic and damaging than our program. But I think we will see when we add up all the numbers that we are only just a little bit behind Europe. I feel, in fact, that we are in a fight to avoid the fate of Europe, particularly the fate of Germany and France and some of the Northern European countries. The number of refugees we take each year is set by the President. The UN Refugee Agency decides who comes in under that quota, and an influential international network of private federal contractors implement the program on the ground. On average, about 90,000 refugees have been admitted per year since 1980. But there are other humanitarian immigration categories which have the same rights and entitlements as refugees, such as asylum seekers. 108,000 came in seeking asylum in 2014. Cuban Haitian entrants, they run over 20,000 a year. Trafficking victims, and so on. Together with refugees, the total of strictly humanitarian arrivals have been running in recent years about 150,000 per year. In addition, we must add the 50 to 60,000 per year of unaccompanied minors that started a couple of years ago and are still going. And it's felt that they'll still reach another 50 to 60,000 of this group. So that's easily 1 out of 5 legal immigrants, and I understand the unaccompanied minors are not necessarily legal, by the way, but they're on their way to legality. And they are a client, if you will, of our own DHHS, Department of Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Settlement. 1 out of 5 legal immigrants is here because, not because of what they offer the U.S., but because of some victim status that they've been able to claim. That's 1 out of 5 that are in fact clients of Office of Refugee Settlement. No one ever expected that it would come to this overwhelming number. And add to that the 500 to 700,000 illegals that manage to get in annually, and you are close to what Europe is getting this year in unplanned flows. It's still not quite there when you compare population and so on. And as I say, we are, the European situation is special. I feel like we're going to fight to avoid what Europe is undergoing now. Traditionally, refugee resettlement was a work of true sacrificial charity, where sponsors and charities committed to maintaining and supporting the refugees with housing and employment, even medical care if needed. Refugees were not allowed to access public assistance. The sponsor bears all costs and responsibility under this model. This helped guarantee assimilation and provided a natural regulation of the inflow. If there was no jobs, if there was no housing, if there was not enough contribution for medical care, they would not be sponsored. It's just that simple. Unfortunately, and as I said, this guaranteed assimilation and regulated the inflow. Unfortunately, this is no longer the case. Private sponsors have morphed into federal contractors, and they act exactly like federal contractors. They're no different from Lockheed Martin or anybody else. Their role basically is linking up refugees to social services, and in many cases providing low-cost labor to certain employers. But basically, I was told directly by a director of ORR, Office of Refugee Settlement, that is their role, linking them up with social services. What was once the responsibility of a private charity and private sponsors has been turned over to the taxpayer by giving refugees access to all forms of welfare upon arrival. And their sponsors, ever eager for more business, there are federal and state contracts, along with an opaque stream of grant money from seemingly every government agency except NASA. One of the main drivers of this program is that there is no cost to anyone, only profit, or no direct cost. We know there's cost to everyone, but there's no direct cost. Add in Chamber of Commerce support, which is significant and a big driver of this program. The support of social justice warriors, the professional left, and a very lazy media, and you have the makings of a never-ending program. There was, by the way, a tiny remnant of the private sponsorship model that was started in the early 90s and lasted for about 5 or 6 years. Basically, it ended because of lack of interest. In other words, there was means for people to bring them over privately if they really wanted, but the program was discontinued for lack of use.
Don, can I ask you to speak up just a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. And also, there is a car, a Lexus out front with the lights on. BR is the first 2 letters, so didn't want anyone car. You've got a Lexus. Is it a Lexus, I think? I think it's, but the lights are on facing this way. So anyway, you can speak up. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, it's a little better. At least until the late 80s, the U.S. picked the large majority of refugees for resettlement to the U.S., or excuse me, until the late 90s. The U.S. picked the large majority of refugees for resettlement. But in recent years, up to 95% of refugees coming to the U.S. were referred by the UN or were relatives of UN-picked refugees. The United States has State Department personnel or federal contractors in 40 different locations, considering 60 different nationalities referred by the UN. As I said, some contractors have also set up shop overseas, where they virtually hang on a shingle explaining how to use the program and how to qualify for the program. And by the way, if you come in and apply for asylum, and asylum means I show up in the country either illegally or overstay a visa and say I want to be an asylum seeker, you also have to show persecution
on the basis of those 5 classes. You can go down to, which I have seen with my own eyes as a translator. I also translated for Russian English. Go down to your local Catholic charities and they'll advise you about how to apply for asylum. So it is a self-perpetuating business, especially as the refugees set up their own NGOs and profit-making entities. The leading source of countries for the U.S. program in recent years are in order of admission: Burma, Iraq, Somalia, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Bhutan and Iran. By the way, Bhutan, we are virtually assisting in ethnic cleansing. The country has a one nation, one country policy where they are virtually cleansing minorities of that country. And we are taking them. In effect, we're helping them. And just as recently as a year ago, I saw Bill Moyers with David Suzuki, the genetics person, having a conversation on PBS. And they were saying how great Bhutan was, as opposed to cruel economics that just look at GDP. Bhutan considered what they call like gross national happiness. And of course, they don't know what's going on. The point is not that Bill Moyers supports ethnic cleansing. The point is he has no idea, and he's a leading journalist of this program, or he wouldn't be praising Bhutan to the skies like that. Anyway, considering that the refugee influx causes increases in all other forms of legal and illegal immigration, as family, clan, and social networks are established in the U.S., the UN is effectively in charge of much of U.S. immigration policy. And again, that's fairly new. That's just since the mid to late 90s. In fact, one of the biggest impacts of the program is the foothold in the chain migration stream that it provides for groups that otherwise would never even have considered or in their wildest dreams thought about coming to America. By the way, the head of the UN Refugee Agency is from Portugal. He was recently cycled out in the last 2 weeks. He was Prime Minister of Portugal. Portugal takes almost no refugees. So do you see a pattern here? You spell hypocrisy. The transformation of refugee resettlement from the work of charities to that of profit-making federal contractors has given birth to a fraud-prone global refugee industry and set off escalating expectations among refugees and would-be refugees around the world. A nonprofit nation of at least 350 taxpayer-funded organizations has grown up around refugee resettlement in the U.S. If you are wondering who these nonprofits are, the largest is the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Its affiliate is Catholic Charities. But at the top of the pyramid is the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops. Others are Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services, Episcopal Migration Services, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, Church World Services, World Relief, U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, and International Rescue Committee. So these are the 9, also ECDC, which is Ethiopian Development Council, Community Development Council. These are the 9 organizations that are lead contractors. They have about 350 affiliates and a practically uncountable number of government-dependent entities that are in the business of providing various services for refugees. And these tertiary and even many of the secondary organizations are managed and staffed by former refugees themselves, setting up a perpetual growth dynamic as refugees arrive and set up their own nonprofits. Essentially, it is an employment opportunity in the professional cottage industry of how to work the system and how to get your co-ethnics over. That's another big thing they advocate for each of their own little groups to come over. The U.S. government, according to its own studies, finds U.S. resettlement, quote, this is a quote from an audit, U.S. resettlement communities are awash with refugee NGOs that exist in name only but provide little meaningful assistance, unquote. Think ACORN without borders. Fraud is found at all stages. In fact, a torrent of third world corruption is pouring in with the program. This provides a continual feed of local news stories about benefit fraud, food stamps, Medicaid, and so on. And lavish lifestyles for some community leaders wherever the program operates. I'm sure you've seen a lot of that here in Texas. Fraud is found from the very beginning of the process. Remember, this is the UN, but even the UN occasionally sounds a warning. A UN News Service report found, and this is a couple of years ago, found, quote, Somalis are using United Nations refugee camps in Zambia as stepping stones to the U.S. This is a direct quote from the UN News Service article. According to the story, the Somalis' first settlement in Zambian refugee camps, they go there intentionally. It's not like they were pushed there or had to. They settled in refugee camps and from there slip into neighboring Zimbabwe and Namibia. From there they filter into South Africa, boarding ships bound for Mexico. And according to the Zambian Interior Minister, Peter Mumba, quote, once in Mexico, they can easily walk into the USA as their final destination. So this is the UN talking about this. From a recent U.S. government report by David Martin, Deputy Counsel for Department of Homeland Security, he finds that in today's conditions, the fraud problem has probably worsened. Quote, in today's conditions, the fraud problem has probably worsened owing to modern communications and the growth of organized crime and other enterprises trying to make money from facilitating a person's inclusion in a resettlement program, resulting in damaging corruption on the part of certain UN officials who find they can extract bribes or other personal favors from moving certain cases to the head of the resettlement line. Unquote. Many refugees make it into the program by virtue of claiming membership in an easy-to-fake referral category, such as women at risk, or like, this is just a category that they use, or claiming to be a persecuted gay, an avenue of admission which this administration had been promoting for several years now. Speaking of these categories, David Martin, again, General Counsel of INS, writes, quote, traditional categories for resettlement referrals, especially the category for women at risk, can become self-fulfilling. When it becomes known that resettlement is possible on this ground, families may separate to enable the woman to win a referral for herself. The children and the husband will come later. So it's just that simple. Fraud is just endemic in the entire system. You can claim a family tie to a previously accepted refugee. It's a privileged category that essentially was for sale on the international black market in many cases. A 2008 State Department audit of these relations found up to 90% to be completely fraudulent. They just signed an affidavit saying, this is my child, this is my wife, and DNA test, at least regarding the child and sibling relations, found 90% to be completely not related at all. The possibility of a generous exception in the U.S. has created a magnet effect which impedes other solutions, such as resettlement in the region where refugees currently reside, or return home. And by the way, it sometimes even happens that groups, as we've noted before, intentionally move to a refugee camp, or once they're there, refuse to leave until they get resettled in the West, because they know that's an option. The true cost of the refugee program has soared as obligations and responsibilities for federal contractors have shrink. The official cost stands at $1.1 billion per year. That's what you'll hear when you contact state and get a cost analysis. $1.1 billion a year. But this accounting does not include the main costs associated with welfare programs, which is the main cost of the program. You have to read the footnotes with this program. There might be a tiny footnote that says does not include welfare. About half the refugees who arrived in the last 5 years are enrolled in Medicaid. 70% are receiving food stamps. By the way, for Middle Eastern groups, Middle Eastern refugees up to 90%. 90% are receiving food stamps. 32% in public housing or receiving housing assistance. 47, and by the way, in all areas where there are refugees in public housing, there's public housing waiting lists. And so additionally, there are some on the waiting list, not to speak of making the waiting list longer for Americans. 47% are getting some kind of cash assistance. Of course, with time, some of the welfare statistics will improve,
but there is long-term, if not permanent, intergenerational welfare dependence for many. For instance, Minnesota recently published statistics showing 2 in 3 Somalis living below the poverty line, and that's the entire group. That's all thanks to refugee settlement. The found poverty rate among its refugees to be twice the national average, and many refugees go straight into SSI, which is called Supplemental Security Income. That's a cash program for those that can show they're disabled or of over 65 and impoverished. So 19% go into SSI, which is just a huge number. I think the statistics here, you have to kind of qualify. It's not always clear. The exact statistic is 19% of families have one or more members that is on SSI. And some of the other, it's strictly by per capita. This is families. But it's still strikingly high. It's probably 4 or 5 times the national average. And this is a permanent program, and brings with it Medicaid and everything else. States and localities must pay a portion of these social services costs. The largest such state cost being the state portion of Medicaid. Refugees bring special health needs. According to Minnesota Health Department, about 6% of recent refugees in 2012 had hepatitis B, 14% had parasitic infections. Texas has about 25% of their refugees tested positive for TB. That's actually kind of lower than other averages, but 25% tested positive for TB. That doesn't mean that they're actively infectious, but it does kind of point to the state of public health, and they're more likely to become infectious. It doesn't mean that they're infectious. I want to point that out. HIV rates, well over twice the U.S. average, and so on. And so Sub-Saharan Africa will be a big source for future years, so the HIV rate will go even more. Cost of translation, that always falls to states. For Tennessee, the cost of translation is about $80 million a year. I would imagine in Texas that's much, much more. I wouldn't want to guess, probably 2 or 3 times that cost. And of course, you can only apportion a part of that to refugees, but because the refugees bring such a multiplicity of unknown languages, it has an outsized impact on the translation costs. It's probably making up about half the translation cost. So including these welfare costs in the cost of the refugee program, you have to multiply that 1.1 billion by at least a factor of 10 or 15 or even more. The cost of the program is easily in the 15 billion a year when you count the real costs. At this point, I'm more than halfway through my talk, but I found that sometimes it's a little bit long, so I thought I would stop for 5 minutes for questions, and then I've got the rest of my talk, and it's less than half, I promise. So are there any questions?
Yeah, we'll, hang on, we'll get you a microphone.
Oh.
Get your microphone. Let's see.
Mic's
This
not
one's
on.
not on, or testing. Yep. Speak, go ahead.
Yes. My question is, since you're doing all of this analysis, have you checked into the food banks and also the Salvation Army and the Goodwill? Because they are also contributing a lot to provide these services for the refugees. Are you aware of that?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Yeah, they certainly do. And in
They're
fact,
instructed to do that.
right, they are. And well, the refugees, as soon as they arrive, they have all the rights and entitlements as U.S. citizens. So, and in fact, they're encouraged to go to the food banks in some cases. Yes, we know that happens. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Jim.
What's the status of when Governor Abbott told the Obama administration he was not going to allow refugees into Texas? What was the status of that? I know there was pushback from the Obama administration.
Yes, Governor. Oh, yes. Sorry. What is the status of Governor Abbott's statement? Did he say he wasn't going to take Syrian refugees, or he was? He's definitely one of the governors that's more proactive on this issue. Now, the model that he took is The refugee industry is supposed to consult on a regular basis with state officials, and as we know, it's a very highly secretive program. They don't consult, they don't let towns, people know that they're coming in. You just wake up the next morning and there's a refugee office down the street. So basically his approach was, you have not been consulting with us, therefore you're not doing your part of the bargain, so we're going to back out on that basis. I've heard some people say it's already not worked, and that's where that is. But you have Brian Babbitt's bill, federal bill, which I think has some hope.
There is Babbitt's bill, which is 3314, which is one of the bills that Act for America is supporting. We will talk about a state refugee and a local refugee resettlement bill that puts some teeth and requires the state or local authorities to do the collection of data. There is a very thin requirement that says the federal government must coordinate or notify local and state authorities.
Right, it's very weakly worded, like you said, a very thin requirement.
Very thin, but
Right. And the other state models that states have taken, one is, I think Indiana, Mitch Schneider, is he the governor of Indiana, or?
Kasich, I think. Oh, no, he's in Ohio.
Yeah.
Mike Pence.
Mike Pence, excuse me. Yeah, Mike Pence. He was saying, okay, and by the way, Congress has the power of the purse on this program. They could pull away the funds, and it would be slow. Mike Pence was saying, okay, we're going to take the state portion of Medicaid, and we're not going to pay that. We have control over that. That also didn't fly. Their attorney general shot it down, and that's not going. The third approach is what Tennessee is doing, which is the 10th Amendment challenge. And by the way, unfortunately, this is not available to Texas at this point. The Thomas More Law Center's promised to take anybody's for free that wants to challenge this program. But they have to have been a state that's already backed out. So 12 states, many of which have already backed out, the contractor just came back in anyway, basically imposing costs on the state taxpayer, using state resources to run a federal program. It's all 10th Amendment issues, red flags all over. So there are 12 states that they have offered free counsel to. So those are the three models that states are taking.
Any other questions for Bert? Yes, Dwight, hang on.
You mentioned the vetting process.
I'll get to that a little bit later. I do touch on vetting, but yes.
My question has to do with that, since the United Nations, to a great degree, is controlled by the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Conference. Is it a fair statement that the vetting is essentially a process of the Islamists?
Well, that has been mooted about quite a bit, and it is also a fact that we've been taking mostly Muslims from even conflict areas where Christians have suffered as much or more. We're still taking mostly Muslims. So that would speak to perhaps the influence of the OIC. However, I do have to say, the UN picks them. Our Department of Homeland Security does the vetting as well. First the UN vets them, and then DHS and other entities do vet them. I do feel that vetting is as good as it can be, but of course it's not that good. But it's not just the U.S. has a part in the vetting role, but they don't have much of a part in the picking role, and I do think that is influencing why, for instance, 98% of Syrians from the Syrian crisis so far have been Muslims and not Christians.
Yes, sir. Aaron McKellian. I've been a member of ACT for about 2 years now, but this whole thing sounds like a well thought out, like almost human trafficking thing put on by the federal government. But you were talking about the 8 or 9 organizations that assist in this endeavor. So how difficult is it, or how difficult would it be to have an organization outside that Big Brother type of, I guess, entity to be able to get in, start another organization in here that might be able to track some of the vetting and exactly where these refugees are going and actually instill some of the American values in accordance with the Constitution?
That's a really good question. And I have to ask, why aren't the organizations that are running it now instilling American values? Why is Catholic Charities not instilling American values? Why is Lutheran Immigration Services and Episcopal Migration Services and so on and so forth? It's all about the money. It really is. It's all about the money. And yes, other organizations occasionally do try to get in because the money is so good, quite frankly. They're not interested in getting the right refugees or instilling American values. There are occasionally other groups do come up, and there probably will be another group because the number of refugees is going up.
Okay, let me address the vetting issue you talked about. The Department of Homeland Security Deputy Director Emmerich said in testimony on the October 5th, 2015, there are no Syrian records to check in many cases. They can't quantify how many refugees they can check properly. And on October the 21st, 2015, the FBI director said there are 10,000 Syrian refugees can't be vetted properly. And just the other day, the State Department stated very clearly that there were 500,000 persons who were on visas that had overstayed their visas. So the refugee resettlement issue is as a tip of the iceberg, really, of the entire immigration, who's coming into this country.
Definitely. We are approaching European style or size impact.
And that's some of the pieces of data in terms of how many are coming into our country. Just 270,000 alone last year that were from Islamic countries, I believe. And that was from testimony that was given before Congress. It's also in one of our handouts, so again, please encourage you. Don, go ahead and finish up the last portion of the reading.
Now, one thing you'll find interesting from the state standpoint, and that is when the program was introduced in 1980, the federal government promised to reimburse the states for their costs related to social services for 3 years. And again, states have considerable costs in this program, principal one being 30% of Medicaid. The feds very quickly backtracked on this promise, first reducing it to 18 months, then to 12 months. By 1991, they eliminated that support to the states altogether. In other words, no more support from the feds. So remember that next time they want to expand Medicaid and the feds say, don't worry, we will support your part of the expansion. It was eliminated in about 11 years, back to zero. It's a massive unfunded mandate imposed on states, and the federal government has even acknowledged that it shifted these costs to the individual states. In addition to this, and in another cost shift to the states, direct federal cash assistance and medical assistance for refugees, aside from welfare, because there is something called RCA and RMA, refugee cash and refugee medical assistance. That was also promised for 3 years. Now it's back to just 8 months. Is this a problem? Well, yeah, I would say so, but it's not a problem for the nonprofits. They report, and the mainstream dutifully repeats such absurdities as 90% of the refugees are self-sufficient 8 months after arrival. I guarantee you, I've seen this dozens of times, and you'll see if you look for it, something along those lines. As if there are no long-term demands on social services. The reason why they pick 8 months is because that's when they quit giving out the refugee cash. They actually quit working with the refugees more like 2 or 3 months, 4 months. They basically are abandoning them. The trick to some of their claims is how you define terms. For instance, the term self-sufficiency, which is a very important metric in this program, and you'll see it in hundreds of documents. It's meaningless in the context of this program. Officially, by federal definition, refugees can be on all welfare programs except for the cash program, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF it's called. And as long as they're not on TANF, they're considered self-sufficient. In other words, you can be in public housing, receiving Medicaid, on food stamps, getting heat supplements and everything, and you're considered self-sufficient. That's the measurement that they use. Employment is another term which has had its meaning radically altered. Our local contractor was bringing refugees to the day labor lots and calling them employed, giving them part-time work, temporary work, and calling them employed. Talk about shaping the narrative. These groups own the narrative. And why did they make such absurd claims to begin with? Well, because they bid for refugee numbers. They are paid on a per refugee basis. And among their measurements of success is employment rate and self-sufficiency rate and so on and so forth. Hence the outlandish claims and inflated numbers. Let's look at some of the ways that money is made by the contractor. First of all, from the State Department, $1,975 per refugee, that's every man, woman, and child, that's children too, for all refugees. For working adults, $2,200 in a program called the Match Grant Program. The history of the Match Grant Program is very revealing. In 1980, the contractor was to put up $1 of its own, and it would get $1 from the feds. Today, the agency puts up $1, and it gets $2 of federal money, plus, for its money, it can substitute used cars, donated couches, used furniture, even volunteer time, up to 80% of that dollar. What that means is, when you donate a couch to these organizations, it presents a bill to the feds, and it turns that couch into money for itself. Even though the couch costs nothing and was donated. But actually the Treasury takes a hit twice. Sometimes you write it off on your taxes, right? And then they get money for the couch back. Basically, for $1 gained in the so-called Match Grant Program, they put up just 10 cents. Now they put up 10 cents for $1. Now there are restrictions around that money. They're supposed to not overdo administrative salaries. They're supposed to show that it goes to the refugees, but we've seen in audits that they're paying the massive salaries, that the money is just going into the sand. And one of my favorites is the travel loan scheme. Basically, you will hear them say that, well, we make the refugees borrow money to buy their air tickets over to the United States. It's an interest-free loan, which the taxpayer provides. The taxpayer provides this loan. The contractors collect the loan. They pocket 25% of the loan. It's a full 25% that they get. Catholic Charities alone's making about $3.5 million a year from this tiny little program alone, loans. And there's no restrictions on this money whatsoever. There's no legal requirement for them to use that for the refugees or what. It just disappears. The largest contractor, the Conference of Catholic Bishops, pulls in about $80 million a year from refugee resettlement. And again, that's just bringing them over. That's not what they get in addition, what they put them into a program that they also contribute to. Basically, its staff, headquarters staff, is paid for by the taxpayer. That's the case with all of the contractors. Their headquarters staff in Washington, they all have Washington offices where they actively lobby. That's paid for directly by the taxpayer. Basically, nonprofits have suffered their own magnet effect, drawing them ever to ever more profitable realm of refugee settlement. And Catholic Conference of Bishops, their refugee operations about 98% funded by taxpayer dollars, 98%. The 2%, I suspect, goes directly into advocacy for higher numbers. It would be illegal to take the taxpayer's dollar and then advocate. They wouldn't do that, I'm sure. So they've suffered their own magnet effect. Providing services for refugees is far more profitable than any other charitable service. I've actually looked at the books of a Catholic Charities affiliate, which is about 65% of their money, and it's hard to do all the dollars, but 65% of the Catholic Charities where we are is strictly refugee settlement there. And I looked at their books for like 3 years. They're getting out of family counseling, they're getting out of homeless counseling, they're getting out of drug counseling. Every year, a little bit less, percentage-wise and absolute dollar-wise, and more into refugee settlement. It's clear clear that refugee program is keeping many of these former charities, and even the entire church, perhaps the entire Episcopal Church, is being kept afloat by this program. There are other sources of income as well. There's grants, they're usually first in line for every single grant that comes down the pike. Violence Against Women Act programs, marriage support, ownership society, faith-based society, USDA farm programs for both socially disadvantaged and so on. They are great and main users of that. And as well, you can get a Department of Justice grant to be used to help you fight discrimination on the basis of national origins when you apply for your grant. Our local community, Somali Community Center, even got an abstinence grant. Remember when abstinence was kind of being promulgated by the Bush administration? They went out and got abstinence money, even though they would never let anybody tell them what to do on that particular score. It's just unbelievable. Basically, they are an extension, these organizations are an extension of government welfare agency, except that they actively lobby for more business. That is for higher admissions quotas. I have a great quote from the former director of the U.S. Bureau that does refugee resettlement, his name is David Robinson. Quote, "The agencies form a single body which wields enormous influence over the administration's refugee admissions policy. It lobbies the Hill effectively to increase the number of refugees admitted for permanent resettlement each year, and at the same time provides overseas processing for admissions under contract to the State Department. In fact, the federal government provides about 90% of its collective budget. As I've said, some of them are more like 98%, but in general, in the big picture, 90%. If there is a conflict of interest, it is, I never mentioned. The solution this group offers to every refugee crisis is simplistic and the same. Increase the number of admissions to the U.S. without regard to budgets or competing foreign policy considerations. The agencies all have lobbying offices in D.C. By the way, D.C. is a large, robust metropolitan area with a robust economy. It also takes almost no refugees. Well, sometimes it takes like 20 or something like that. Something basically like Delaware. And by the way, this same lobbying consortium, which changes its name every few years, it's one of these shape-shifting, name-changing organizations that pops up with a new name. This year, the lobby is demanding that the refugee quota be nearly tripled. It wants an annual intake of about 200,000 a year, including 100,000 Syrians. In a letter dated to the president, making this demand, signed by about 80 congressmen, it was dated September 11th, 2015. I find that, quite frankly, amazing. I don't think it's an accident. I don't tend to go towards conspiracy theories, but I have to believe they picked this date intentionally as a bow to the president's determination to rebrand 9/11, or to quote Donald Trump, something is going on here. We don't know what it is, but something's definitely going on. In Texas, the congressman that signed the document asking for a tripling of refugee resettlement, which remember, you triple refugee resettlement, you're going to triple a lot of other programs as well, all the follow-ons and add-ons. Lloyd Doggett, March Beasy, Beta O'Rourke. I don't know if these are in your names. By the way, Lamar Smith is great on this issue. I think he's the congressman for Bexar County, is that right?
Yes.
Lamar, yeah, he's been very good on this for many years. As far as the responsibility of the agencies, well, they're really close to nil. Their obligations, their official contractual obligations end after 3 or 4 months. You're bringing in people that are pre-literate, they're not even literate in their own language, and you're dumping them after 3 or 4 months. It's totally outrageous. Again, their responsibility is simply linking them up to social services or low-wage part-time employers. Former Senator Lugar issued a report about resettlement a few years ago. The title says it all. Abandoned upon arrival, implications for refugees and local communities burdened by a U.S. resettlement system that is not working. The report concludes, as do other reports, that the refugee industry brings to U.S. communities refugees with inadequate resources and no advance warning to host cities. And again, one of the most striking aspects of this program is its secretiveness. There are consequences for this short-term engagement cycle. One is upward pressure on the numbers. If all they're paid to do is get them over here, as I say, provide bus transportation, and not beyond 3 or 4 months, well, there's a need to move on to the next batch rather than provide meaningful help for a longer period of time. So that's just a structural question of the way it works. There's a constant need for new arrivals, who in their turn are dropped quickly for the next group. But a truly catastrophic effect of this short engagement cycle is the total abandonment of the assimilation ideal. You do know that the federal government no longer has as an objective assimilation, right? The word has been completely dropped from government reports, all government lexicon. Someone can do a paper finding like the number of times the word assimilation was used, and then at some point it was completely erased from the language. So basically, this total abandonment of the assimilation ideal has resulted in isolation of groups ill-equipped to function in modern society. There's really relatively little contact with Americans from many of these groups. They immediately go into their own ghettos. Their own people are helping them work the system. And some of them don't even want that. I've talked to refugees who said, you know, no Americans ever taken me into their house. I never really saw an American. I went straight to my own community. This guy didn't want to go to a mosque, but he felt like he had to because that was the only support that he was getting. With the numbers coming in and with the model of the contractors, there is not even lip service to assimilation. There has been, I'm quite sure this is a major role in radicalization that we've observed with some refugees. There's been a lot in the news lately about radicalization of Somali refugees, particularly in Minnesota. About 100 have left to fight for ISIS, and about 40 have come back from that group. And by the way, you know, about 3,000 Western passport holders from Europe and so on are fighting for ISIS. Another 3,000 Russians are fighting for ISIS as well. Russia, think of as not a typically Islamic country. But there's just a lot of Westerners and Russians, which are kind of like half Western, not completely. This has totally contributed to the radicalization that we've observed. As you know, about midway through 2012, 2 Iraqis were arrested for plotting to send Stinger missiles to Al-Qaeda. Their fingerprints were on IEDs that were found in Iraq. They had come over as refugees, or really another special category. There's so many kind of quasi-refugee-like categories. These are special immigrant visas, but the same thing. They're immediately eligible for welfare. It's basically treated the same way. Even a brief review of cases. We have the 93 World Trade Center bombers, including the blind sheikh who inspired the attack, the 93 attack. We have the marathon bombers. We have just in the last few days a couple of individuals from Houston, I believe. These were all taking advantage of refugee and asylum laws. The 93 bombers were here as asylum seekers, again, using the same 1980 refugee law. Regarding the Syrian refugees, as Roy was saying, the FBI director says we can only query against data that we have collected, and we have not collected any data on them. So, end of story, we can collect all we want. There's not going to be anything found if there's nothing to find. Instead of improving refugee screening, the president has reduced screening criteria. Last year, he reduced the requirement, loosened the restrictions on refugees who were guilty of providing material support to terrorist groups by exempting those who had provided, quote, Kenneth Blankus, the president of immigration adjudicators, that would be the judges as well as the lawyers and asylum officers and so on, said, we are letting terrorists into the United States right through the front door. According to him, the Obama administration is actively blocking efforts by ICE officers to protect Americans. Quote from Mr. Blankus, in fact, this administration has widened loopholes that terrorists could use to gain entry to the U.S. through our asylum system. Applications for entry are rubber stamped, the result of rating agents by speed rather than discretion. We've become the visa clearinghouse of the world. Security, of course, is paramount, but there's something else that is important here. This harmonious, multicultural, universal nation we were promised is not quite coming into view, and we don't need a San Bernardino to be aware of that. Needless to say, large-scale immigration from Islamic countries is the ultimate challenge to the universal nation thesis. And this, to a large degree, is driven by the refugee program. The program is not its largest source, but is much more likely to bring in the uneducated and fundamentalists. So it's thus having an outsized impact on communities trying to absorb them. In the early 90s, the refugee program was about zero Muslim. The blind sheikh was here on as an asylum seeker, not as a refugee. There was 0% refugees coming in the early 90s. By 9/11, it was up to about 45% Muslim, and today it's back to perhaps running close to 45% Muslim. The aggressive mosque planting campaign, which accompanies this immigration, is an indicator of how poorly assimilation is working. But it's not only the rejection of the assimilation model, but these mosques are largely built by foreign governments. Does it seem strange that we make such a big deal when the county government posts the Ten Commandments and the claim is made that this is trotted out as an egregious example of government sponsorship of religion? Yet the mosques are largely built by, and sponsored and supported and built by by governments, by a government. Happens to be a foreign government, but is this not a state, church-state issue? Actually, apparently not. Actually, the program itself is one large church-state issue on many fronts, but you'll never hear that. The refugee influx, and that including the overall humanitarian influx of children, asylum seekers, trafficking victims, which is another very corrupt, are subject to corruption and already has been corrupted quite a bit, is providing constituencies for an expanding government for bigger social programs. And quite frankly, it's a constituency for the ethnic grievance industry as well. In fact, a kind of pernicious codependence has developed between the refugee industry and the welfare state. Government money has totally driven out private money as the source of the refugee program. And we will get more of the behavior we pay for. This, I think, is the crucial issue. There would be no problem if traditional charity was the basis of this program. But as it is, it's on a trajectory for expansion. This program has come to hometown America. I'm sure 10 years ago, I think Texas has been experiencing it more in other parts of the country, but probably 10 years ago, you never would have expected it even in Texas, I don't know. But it's come to hometown America, where it's increasingly visible, especially the entitlements, especially the demands. It's little understood, and assessment is long overdue. We might actually find a way to help more refugees. The question should not be whether we help, but how we help. There are plenty of other options, but for that conversation to begin, we must lift the curtain of myth which has protected the refugee industry from open discussion. Thank you.
Another round of questions?
Was supported tripling of...
No, he did not support it. Sorry. I meant to say he is very good on this, on refugee settlement, and he always has been. There's been times when he voted, he was the single vote against the expansion. They're always expanding definitions, they're always opening up to groups, and there have been times when Lamar Smith was the only vote in the House against like a silly expansion, silly egregious expansion. Yes?
Yes, I know that you kept mentioning the Catholic charities, but have you done any kind of research on the fact that the mosques all over do not sponsor the refugees?
That is a good question. They are definitely, I'm sorry, I'll repeat the question.
They do not.
Why, the question I think is, why is it that the mosques do not sponsor refugees? Well, I think you will see that in the future. Right now there is one of the sponsored, one of the contractors is called ECDC, it's the Ethiopian Council for Ethiopian Community for Development or something like that. There is an Ethiopian that has Islamic influence, and they do sponsor refugees, so there is some. But the mosques are not paying their own money. No, they're not. But neither local churches. The local churches are not taking up a collection and supporting this program. It's all paid for by the taxpayer. So, but you're right.
Another question back here.
In regards to the, you said people overstaying their welcome, and I'm questioning about the data and so many people, everyone overstaying their welcome, refugees. How do you see this as far as the mark of the beast system? Because I see this being able to be implemented because, oh, we can't keep track of everybody.
You can hold the microphone up a little bit closer.
So we can bring the system in regards to, we've got an abundance of people, we can't keep track of them. What in regards to the mark of the beast do you think this could be done?
What in regards to what? I missed one part of the question. One of my ears is
The mark of the beast. Where do you see the collecting of data and all of these people and us not being able to control the amount of people that we have here? So we need to bring in a mark of the beast system.
Of what kind of visa?
Mark of the beast.
Mark of the beast.
I don't know. In other words, we have to mark them. We have to mark everybody to control our borders. Well, I certainly hope not. We could do minimal. We're not even doing minimal stuff to control our borders. We don't have to go that far. We could easily, like Roy was saying, about 500,000 people have not left, that came in recently and have not left. We could be easily tracking people when they come in, and send out notices and run them down when their time comes up and they haven't left. Because when they leave, they have to log out too. In effect, they log in and they log out. And we're not pursuing that. There's other ways without getting to over-identification. I do understand, we don't want everybody to be wearing an ID.
You stated that this is contributed to by taxpayers. Okay, but when you contribute, for instance, to the Archbishop's appeal, does that go into the Catholic charities to that?
Honestly, and I've seen internal church documents to this effect, it generally goes to lobbying.
Goes to where?
Lobbying.
For more money.
It goes to lobbying for bigger programs. Exactly. Now, if they have any left over, yes, they'll probably do some real charity. But this program is nothing related to charity whatsoever. And I think that is a way that you can address them directly and just ask the kind of, why is it that, do you really care about refugees if all you care about is the money? As a matter of fact, I was told by a State Department contact of mine that after 9/11, they knocked the program offline for a little bit, and they said, well, we're going to start putting money overseas, where, by the way, the dollar goes at least 20 times farther. You can help 20 more people. Roy had mentioned that. It's not 12, it's at least 20. But they actively lobbied against putting money to overseas. They don't want money to go, they want money to go into their coffers. So I think that's a weak point of theirs. I think it's a crucial feature of the system that's making it so go wildly off the tracks.
Other than money, what is the objective of bringing all the immigrants here?
Well, I have thought about that quite a bit, and I still don't have an answer. There are a few people, the globalists, but they're relatively few in number. They're not up there pulling the strings. George Soros, although George Soros does truly fund a lot of the organizations that are out there advocating for wider immigration and more refugee settlement. That is true. There's a few people like him. It's momentum. It's just already up and going. It's hard to stop. It's jobs. Literally, they'll go to Congress and say, well, if they have in the past, if you cut this program, we'll lay off like thousands of workers. And it's flying under the radar. It's not been noticed by people. I think it will be noticed now. I do think it will be noticed more and more as it gets more diverse and as it's spread around more often as we see like the Badminton.
Don, I've got one more question over here, and we'll close it up here. Shall I go ahead with your question?
I have a very soft voice, so I apologize. And I apologize, I mean, stand to raise my hand, but I just got out of the hospital, and I wanted to hear you tonight. I realize that you're not from the state of Texas, nor are you from San Antonio. And in this part of the country, we do have Catholic Charities, which is an organization highly praised by the majority of the people in certain parts of Texas. How much, when we talk about overstaying borders, what you're speaking of, and visas, is it not easier to even foster that more by having charities that don't report real numbers and things to you? In other words, Catholic Charities here can bring in anyone, particularly we have been bringing in, obviously, southern parts of America. And we're a benevolent city, state, country, the United States is as a whole. And I don't think people realize the difference between overstaying visas and
Well, once you've overstayed your visa, you are an undocumented alien. Once you've overstayed your visa. And by the way, as far as the bulk of illegal immigrants in this country, they say about 40% have simply overstayed their visas, so they are illegals. Now, the rest of your question? Okay.
Okay. I want to, first of all, thank you, Don, so much for coming tonight all the way from Tennessee.